Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this performance assurance webinar. My name is Jenny, and I'll be facilitating today's event. Today, I'm joined by V, Anton, Lewis, and Nirav. Just before we get started, we ask that you keep your cameras and your microphones off. This event will be recorded, so if you missed anything, you will be able to revert back to the slides and the recording. We will be using Slido for our Q&A portion, and I'll share the QR code in the next slide. There will be opportunities to ask questions throughout the meeting and at the end. So if you have any questions at any time, just type it into Slido. So this is the QR code. And I think we have a link in the chat as well. We'll just wait for people to scan that. Okay, I think I'll move on. Like I said, there is a link in the chat as well. This is the agenda for today, so we have a lot to get through. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Anton.
So before discussing too much about the technical detail that will come later in the meeting, we wanted to start with why and just remind ourselves of the key purpose. So that italic sentence is our key purpose: active monitoring of market participants and service provider performance using an effective toolkit of techniques to drive improvement. I think it's quite important. You can see those two clear things within our scope: market participants and service providers, and kind of towards the end of the session we'll talk a bit more about that. So what do we actually do? Sometimes we're active gatekeepers, and this probably isn't something that most market participants see. So for example, if you're trying to enter the process, we have several new party applications in process. If you're trying to access data because you've got a new use case, maybe you're a TPI or a TPIS or one of the other types of organizations who are interested in inquiry service data. Maybe you want to become a metering engineer. We act as active gatekeepers to protect both consumers and those in the marketplace to make sure people are ready to operate and safe and appropriate. We assess value. So the REC is funded by the parties predominantly, although non-parties also do make a contribution for the services they access. Particularly we assess value in terms of service provider performance and drive improvements in those. And actually that often is a direct piece of value for the market participants. We look to incentivize others. Part of the ethos that I've tried to instill is to make sure that we are balanced and proportionate, because everything we do has someone on the other side, and we need to be proportionate with that. And our approach has been to incentivize improvements instead of getting into a bit more of the heavy-handed approaches, and actively driving improvements. This all has to result in value from better service provider performance, better outcomes for market participants. Often, for example, people suffer because data other people haven't cleansed, then creates issues for others in the market, but also for consumers. So, we clearly look at things like erroneous switches. Clear consumer duty there. It's really important to say we stick in a box, which is in the REC. We manage against this tightly defined code. Now it does get pulled and stretched and morphed as things go on by change proposals that often market participants raise, but our scope is that retail energy code and those key obligations, and the beneficiaries here are each other. How many times have you had data issues that are caused either because somebody switched into you, or you acquired this new metering point, and it's got data issues and you have to go sort it out? Sorting these problems helps each other. That's a real value to consumers. And we should acknowledge that one of the things we do, a lot of our activity that relates to the metering operation schedule, does have beneficiaries in energy settlement. And we're not here to go and improve energy settlement. We're here to improve performance against our code. But actually, one of the things that our techniques are doing is driving improvements in those space. So I wanted to move on to the next slide, if that's okay. So we're about to issue an annual report, and we poured a lot of time and effort into this, but I wanted to share 4 key takeaways that we had throughout our year. I would invite you all to read the full document. It's not massive. It's I think about 13 pages, but it does tell you many of our observations on the market. The first one is the most important, right? So in the year, CSS went live, and monitoring switching has been an essential part of what we do. Absolutely essential. We all wanted it to succeed, but there was a risk that there would be some real problems with a new system. But switching is broadly working. We are seeing less switching than other periods through history, but there is enough to show that it works, that the processes work, that the participants can do this. There are bits that need refining and improving, and we have acted to refine and improve some specific bits around the switching journey. But I think that's a really important message, that monitoring tells us, and that it allows us to prioritize differently over time. There are real problems, though, with service provider performance, including in the switching space. REC isn't just switching. And these challenges need a concerted effort by performance assurance and others in this ecosystem to drive performance improvements. We said before, value for money is a key thing that we are looking to drive. And part of that is service providers delivering the level of service you expect consistently. There is huge demand for REC data from outside of REC parties. We're seeing more and more people wanting to use the inquiry services, either as part of the switching journey, maybe brokers or people like that, but also for new and novel ways of doing things, particularly as the energy transition is moving at pace. It's really important as a gatekeeper that we do share appropriate level of information, that we make sure people have appropriate information security controls, and that there's a decent way when new things come along that those are engaged, that those involved are engaged in it. One of my personal takeaways, and it's really important in the annual report, engaging in the right way has driven real and valuable change. We think about some of the things that we see that are working and some of the things that we see haven't worked. And actually, in switching, some of the things that have been challenges are where it is not very clear the way they are communicated. We talk about annulments and withdrawals, for example, or the lack of clear definitions in the I&C market around how to validate a change of tenancy situation around a switch and when you should object. We have taken action to drive improvements in this space, and actually a lot of the most beneficial ones have been through engaging with parties, through engaging particularly with the RIG, the REC issues group, but not exclusively, and getting the right balance between these positive engagements and asking questions in different ways or other techniques has been important. I don't think we'll ever get to a situation as an assurance function where that is our only method. I must say there have been some serious interventions to protect other market participants in some isolated ways, and we believe they have also been effective. But actually getting the right engagement in the right way is the key for us to be pushing greater value out of this service. If you just move to the next one, which I think is the last one from me. We promised in our last operating plan to share good news with you and not only challenges. You'll notice that we often think about driving improvements. Improvements are often where there are problems. What are the key good news features I'd like to share with you? There were some real challenges in the first month of the switching program post CSS go live, but switching timelines have improved, erroneous switch rates have improved. The most important thing of all is that these processes are working in reality. We prepared and did monitoring on some of the errors and issues providing information into CSS, and actually that issue didn't arise, and the central data we monitored for that shows that things are working. We've also seen improvements in switch meter reads. Some of that improvements in performance, we think, is about clarifying things, providing better guidance, and as I said, engaging in the right way. We have seen similar issues with annulments and withdrawals that we've helped clear up, and we think need further improvements to the drafting, although there is guidance to help people understand in that space. We've taken action in relation to inappropriate objections, and these inappropriate objections are really about protecting other, in this case, suppliers from the inappropriate actions of other people in the market. It's really important that valid switches do go through and that proper functioning works. We've also pinpointed, as we've said, where policy development needs to take place to help make this clearer, more obvious, simpler, and more effective. Theft, I think, is good news, although the overall rate of theft detection, I would say, is broadly consistent. We would all hope that there is less theft and greater detection rates, I would say. Actually, we've been trying to make this an easier process and a more effective process for those involved. Better views on the data that we see. I think we need to go on to the next slide. So we're going to talk later about how we're going to evolve this. And I just wanted to share some of my reflections on what's really important and how we think about this. Like, it needs to evolve with REC arrangements. The biggest thing that's happened since REC Go Live was CSS Go Live, but further things have changed. The landscape of how this ecosystem works and is managed has changed, and we need to evolve with that. We need to build further trust that REC services are delivering the standards and value that you should rightly expect of them, and there is further work for us to do in that space. I think it needs to be more visible. There are things that we do that are more appropriately confidential, and we discuss with the PAB for key decisions. And I think those things will stay confidential. But I think it needs to be more visible to you, and this is a big push of mine. And I think we need to find ways to encourage digitalization and efficient data collection and be pragmatic with the data requests that we have of you. I think I said it earlier, everything that we do probably has somewhere out there in the market who does something in response, and that is a real cost. We need to be conscious of that and have been very focused on increasing that balance of central data provision over stuff submitted to us by parties. Clearly, this is not an either or, this is an extent to which question, but getting that balance right, helping drive digitalization and simplification. For example, can we get better information captured in SDEP so we can not ask people for an analogous set of information? That would be a massive step forward. I think these are the key priorities for me when we think about how we evolve this service and drive greater value out of it. That was the prepared bit. There's a bit from me later at the end before I hand over. I just wanted to say I'm quite open for people asking us questions as they go. So if you do want to ask a question before I hand the baton over, I'm more than happy with that.
And I'm just putting up the QR code now. So if you have any questions, you can ask them. Okay, I think we'll move on for now. Thank you, Anton, and I'll pass off to Lewis.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm going to cover the next two sections. So I've got this first one here, which is about the annual rating, which I'll explain more of in a second. And then we've got a quick update on dashboard developments. So to start, what is this annual rating? So it is a new methodology we're introducing for the first time this month to assess the performance of parties on an annual basis, providing each party with a performance rating for the year. So it's currently only being applied to supplier and DNO parties. However, this may change in future years. So this annual rating allows the co-manager and the PAB to gain an overall view of performance across the market and at a supplier level. And the idea is it also provides parties with an indication of any areas they may need to focus improvement efforts on for the upcoming year. So the rating is determined based on a set of defined criteria, which I'll get to on the next slide. Just that criteria, as was discussed quite heavily internally before finalisation, and went through many different iterations, including consultation with the PAB along the way. It will be set on a year-on-year basis, so it may change going forward depending on what the priority areas for us and the PAB are over the coming years. So what is the annual? So I guess now I'll just talk about what the different ratings are. So the idea is there are parties can be rated against one of 4 different ratings for the year, going from no material weakness, which is effectively the highest performing rating, to severe weakness as effectively the worst rating. So just to step through those in turn. So no material weakness effectively means no significant issues identified, and we see you as meeting your compliance obligations, and then stepping down to got minor weaknesses, which means that you met most of your code obligations. There may be some minor breaches, but there were no significant issues. And then we have moderate, which is either multiple minor code breaches or potentially a single significant compliance issue, or the data indicated an increased risk of potential poor consumer outcome. And finally, severe. So this is where either a significant portion of party processes fail to meet the requirements of the code, or the data indicated poor consumer outcomes are occurring. So we just move to the next slide. Thank you. So the rating was calculated by assessing supplier and D&O parties against the criteria listed here. And this criteria was applied over the period between the 1st of April 2022 and the 31st of March 23. So just to run through each one. So the criteria assessed were effectively how many risk drive, or what proportion of risk drivers did you have that were over the PAB threshold during the year, the percentage of your theft target that you achieved, where the timeliness of your maintenance and qualification submissions. And then there's 3 there all around different types of PAT. So did you have an action plan PAT aside issued? Did you have a management assertion PAT issued, or a specific condition PAT? And then finally, did you breach any CME conditions if you were in controlled market entry? So the way this works is that if you met any one of those conditions within each of those different ratings, so you would then be assigned at that rating. So you are assigned, in other words, you're assigned based on your worst performing criteria. So let's say, for example, if as a party I scored in no material weakness for everything except from the CME condition breach, I would still be assigned as a severe weakness, even though I was no material weakness in all the other areas. So I think that is the most important thing to note here, that it is based on your worst performing criteria. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So I guess quick one on what's next. What do you need to do as a party? So if applicable, so if you're a supplier or a D&O, the annual rating for your organization is now available in the performance assurance dashboard on the overall score tab. That's been published this morning. So if you go and see the dashboard today, that will be available to you. You can see the little table on the right hand side on the screenshot. That is where your overall score will be stated. And on that table, you will also see the criteria of which you put you into that rating. So if going back to my previous example, if you were rated as being in the severe weakness bucket, and that was due to your CME condition breach, it would state on there that you were it would state your annual rating was severe and that it was due to a CME condition breach. So you should have full transparency over what bucket you're in and why you're assigned that bucket. We've also today launched a annual rating rec wiki page, which summarizes all the information I've already been through and probably actually a bit more. we will be issuing a email as well to all supplier and DNO contract managers and alternates, highlighting that this is available, and also we'll provide a link to the annual rating rec wiki page on there as well. So our main ask for you is that you review your annual rating as soon as possible, or as soon as convenient. And if you do have any queries, as always, please get in contact with the rec service desk. Okay, so next section is just a quick update on some dashboard developments. So this is both some recent dashboard developments and some that are going to be coming that you'll be seeing over the next few months. So just to go over, I guess, the top three, which are recent developments. So in July, we made the overall score of your peers available in the overall score tab. So as you see previously, you just saw basically a scatter plot as to where you scored each month, whereas now you can see on a monthly basis where you are versus your peers. We also published the theft payment amounts for suppliers in August to the one of the theft tabs on the dashboard. And then, as I mentioned today, the annual rating has gone up as well. We will be issuing an updated dashboard user guide over the next couple of days as well, which obviously covers those more recent updates and provides a bit more guidance there on where you can find all the latest developments. As hopefully many of you will have seen, there was a survey issued a couple of months ago, I think, regarding whether you would prefer your MPXN level data to be published anonymized by default. And obviously many of you have responded to that, so thank you very much. And we will be looking to take the results of the survey and implement them on a individual organization basis in October. So just to note there, if you as an organization responded no to that survey, as in you would not like you would just like to remain with the anonymized data published, we will not make any change for you. You will still receive your MPXNs on an anonymized basis where they are, where we do receive them in an anonymized or pseudonymized format. We will also be launching some video walkthroughs of the dashboard. This is to go hand in hand with the user guide. So what we plan to cover there is some use cases, some case studies into how you may go through and walk through the dashboards as a party. So for example, it would be if you're a MEM, we would walk through, right, what dashboard tab do you need to look at each month, what's important to you. As a supplier, the same, as a DNO, the same. And I guess we will also be going through a annual dashboard review cycle in November, as that would have been a year since the dashboard was launched. So what we will be doing there is we will look to gather feedback from industry as to how we could improve the dashboards, and gather any if there's any improvement points, feedback, concerns, anything like that. We'll gather it there and use that annual review to inform our development plan for the upcoming year. And then finally, so this bottom one does have a date of to be confirmed, but I just wanted to raise it as it's one that's been mentioned previously and is on our list, but because it's a larger update, we just need to do a bit more work to figure out when we can release it, given it requires work on both ours, the dashboard side and on the portal side as well, so it's a bit more complicated. But there has been feedback raised in the past about whether a separate permission could be created specifically to allow the viewing of dashboards without any of the other performance assurance tiles in the portal. So that is just a flag that is still on our list. Okay, so I think that is me done. If there's no questions.
There are a few questions.
Here we go.
So we'll start with the top one. With the annual ranking, when we have received RFCs, your data is wrong and giving a false view of supply performance. How can you quantify the ranking?
So I'll answer that question. So one of the reasons we engage with industry in tools such as RFCs is to assess and understand this information. We do, as part of the rating, consider kind of more serious techniques that that are involved, and they show up as part of the rating, but an RFC would not. But engaging with you with an RFC to understand why, for example, central data looks like there are issues in with you, and understanding whether or not those are real issues, is a valuable activity and allows us to refine our metrics in the future. So, for example, we're in the process of splitting out between domestic and non-domestic some of the objection data that we receive to better reflect the distinctions between these two. So I would say that that is important, and actually I think it shows the need to engage constructively in this process to better support more accurate measurement.
Okay, and the next question is, can parties challenge the annual performance rating?
So the annual performance rating is information that has been provided to you consistently in the past. So for example, if you've had a maintenance of qualification requirement and you've been provided notifications, reminders of the deadline, and still missed the deadline and been chased in the past, then that would contribute to your annual performance rating. If you think you, for example, did indeed submit your maintenance of qualification thing on time, I think it is important that you engage with us to do that. I don't think the rating per se is something that should be challenged. I think the evidence base kind of, a missing MOQ ends you up in a certain rating, and the accuracy of whether that was missing or delayed, I think, is the appropriate thing. I do think it is important that parties have had the risk dashboard data for almost a year now, and I think it's important that you engage with us, particularly if there is something that makes your risk dashboard data look unusual. I want to remind people that essentially we have a mechanism for that. So if you are going through an internal migration, for example, you are required under the code to tell us in advance so we understand. And one of the reasons we're interested in that is because if something pops up that's weird in your dashboard that we don't have to ask you about it, you can proactively tell us. Now, if there are reasons such as that, firstly, I would say be proactive and tell us about things that are going to affect your business or your information, and we can work out what our interpretation of that is and how that should be acted upon. But I think that is relevant. It is important that you can question the data. It's also important to reflect that your annual rating goes to you, not to anybody else. Well, to your organization is probably a better way of saying it. So, if you do have questions on the underlying information, I think that's appropriate. Please raise them to the inquiries mailbox. But I think the logic, if you've missed your MOQ, you get this, you move up you get into a slightly worse rating. I don't think that is something that would be challenged. Somebody came on camera. Did they want to ask a question around that? Okay. I think I've covered the second one. So we are mandated, where possible, to use central information. We have to make the best use of that information that we can. We talked about that pragmatism. We talked about that pragmatism between asking you to provide us massive amounts of information on your or using central data sources. We talked about our purpose was to monitor the market. I do think we take constructive challenge and steer on the information that we provide. So I think people have known that we're here, and I think it is important that you engage with it if that's right. Why have parties not been told about the annual rating before today? We have told parties about the annual rating in 3 of these webinars in the past. We've talked about our methodology, and we've talked about our intention of using that information. So I think this is a relevant place for us to describe and communicate things. The next one. The current outstanding PATs is incorrect based on outstanding PAT. Team do not respond to RFCs or close on the portal, so this is wrong ranking. So the C in RFC is an important word. That's a request for clarification. This is about us trying to validate and understand data and give you an opportunity to help us get the right picture of your performance. We don't consider these as part of the annual rating because they are about making the most out of this central data. If something weird's happened with the central data, we want to understand it and understand the cause. We want to do that with you. That doesn't affect your annual rating.
Yeah, I think, yeah, also worth reiterating that it's only certain types of PATs that are included in this rating. So it's only the, I guess, the higher up the escalation ladder PATs that are included. So not RFIs and RFCs, which are the two most common that we issue, they are not included.
Okay. Should we keep going? I think I've covered what is meant by total PATs issued. So if we provided guidance to the whole industry, that doesn't really count. But if there are specific conditions on your trading, that's a very serious intervention that we've had with decided with the PAB, that would count. Will any findings from previous years be subject to re-rating? So our annual rating is proposed to cover that year. And actually, one of the things that we would like this to do is to incentivize improvements to performance so that we can later reflect that the overall health of the market is improving. I don't think it would be appropriate to go back and edit previous years. Now, if there's some information or data around that year, okay, that's a query on that data, but I don't think we should kind of rerun it. Obviously, the annual rating is an annual activity, so it would be provided again next year. And the PAB are pretty clean that next year's, with the right communication, would be provided kind of in a broader sense, whether that is to each other or in a broader sense to the public. So I think that's the appropriate way. Why was there no consultation on the annual rating? So the PAB are the organisation responsible for decisions around this methodology. We consulted in depth with them. I think we probably went to the order of 6 meetings with different proposals to refine it. And we have used information at every stage that organisations would be aware of following a clear methodology. So I think that is an appropriate level of engagement. We've also articulated it at multiple of our webinars. Lewis, perhaps you would help on the specifically which PATs are included.
Yes, so it was on the previous slide and it will be on the wiki. So you will have a copy of what that is, but it is the action plan PAT, the management assertion and specific conditions. So I guess I'll answer that top one as well. Can parties get a full breakdown of their rating? So on your dashboard, on the overall score tab of your dashboard in the table, it will tell you for which reasons you received that rating. And then I guess, as Anton mentioned, just to reiterate, the annual rating is calculated based on information you parties have visibility of as well. So it is possible if you did wish to like verify, check, go back through, work out all the specific details if you did want to.
Okay. I think there was a question that might have gone that was relevant on the scoring criteria method. I believe we brought exactly this scoring criteria to the previous webinar, which included, I don't know, here are the rating categories, and if you if you do not maintain your qualification on time, you kind of fall into this space. So you can see what's relevant for you. I think in our Lewis, can I just check, in our annual rating guide, will that kind of broader criteria, because you might be in the best category, for example, but want to know, how do I stay in that best category?
Yeah, that same criteria. So that same table as on this PowerPoint is in the Rec Wiki as well.
So if ratings are not published, what's the consequence of having a poor annual rating? I think the discussion that we've had demonstrates the need for care in how we communicate this information and engagement. I think people want to feel like they've had plenty of opportunity to get used to it, to understand it, to make sure it's valid. So the initial plan is to share it directly with you. The PAB also will get an overall market level view. And later, to use that for more broader sharing, we do agree it will become a more effective incentive if you could see each other's, and if those in public can see your performance. However, I think it's appropriate to go with industry at the right pace and not rush to that, so everyone can feel confident that they understand it and that they can understand how they can influence it. Right, why has theft been included in the rating? The ability of parties to detect theft is influenced by a lot of factors. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't
Sorry
quite
about that.
read
Let
it.
me read that out for you just a second. Sorry, I can't find the question right now. Could the person?
I think the detection of theft in many instances is outside the supplier's control, I think, or something along those lines.
So parties have had a long established incentive to detect theft and are given targets based effectively on their market share. Many organisations engage positively in this, and we do accept that there is some variability in this and that it is not solely within your control. However, we would expect parties responding to this incentive to engage in the process and detect at a reasonable level. We haven't set this, for example, at 100% of your target. We have set it within much more reasonable bounds. However, we do see some comparable suppliers having very good theft performance and others of a similar size having very little. And we think that that is really important to consumers. The detection of energy theft helps everybody in the market and helps consumers. Now, I want to reiterate on this annual rating that this is only going to you, and that it is possible for you, now that you understand where we are and where this will do, to influence your own performance. And I think that is an important part of this incentive.
Thank you. Sorry, Anton, was that question answered? Sorry.
The theft one, hopefully, but not the Ofgem one.
Okay, I'm just going to quick fire through a few questions just because I'm conscious of time. So yeah, will this be shared with Ofgem, and how will they use the annual rankings for suppliers?
I cannot talk on Ofgem's behalf. We will not share the information that we're showing you with Ofgem, although they do have a right to attend the PAB and can see the PAB papers. I do not believe that they expect to use it in the annual ranking.
Thank you. Is there an overall annual ranking list so parties can see how they're performing against the whole market?
We believe that that would be a beneficial thing to do, and there is obviously some tranching. If you're a supplier, it's not relevant to compare you to a MEM, and if you're a massive supplier, it's not relevant to compare you to a very small supplier. But I think it's important that you get to see your own, you get to understand where the data is derived from, before these types of incentives are brought in. So it's coming in a phased manner.
Thank you. Data on our dashboard is incorrect, specifically in relation to the number of PAT outstanding issued. How do we get it corrected?
I think if you have a specific query like that, please raise a ticket to the inquiries.
Thank you. Annual maintenance. Can you please confirm that REC service user compliance statement can be signed by a director in the company who signed off in previous year?
I think the individual signing it needs to align with the guidance. I think if they are a director of the company, or hold equivalent status is the guidance. So I don't know if who signed it off last year makes much difference. It's more about if they meet the guidance. If they met it last year, then I would assume they still hold a directorship position.
Thank you. And what actions are expected? What actions are suppliers expected to do off the back of the annual rating?
I think some people are already doing them already. Let's validate the data. Let's engage actively in the process, and let's find ways to improve performance.
Thank you. Why annual and why not quarterly?
Good question. I think it's a balance between measurement period. We discussed this with the PAB, and their view was annual was appropriate. But also, I think if things were moving around quite a lot every quarter, that might be a bit noisy.
Thank you. Our MOQ status is showing as outstanding whilst our record within the portal shows approved. What do we need to do? I think this is also an inquiries.
I think inquiries is right. So that would be that the MOQ would be late. So I think it's important to submit it per the deadline, and you get many notifications of that deadline as it approaches.
And I think this top question is kind of the same as that. Our MOQ status is showing as outstanding. Yeah. Last two questions. Where would I find the overall score of peers for DNO?
So that is, shall I cover that one? Yeah. So that's if you go on your performance assurance dashboard, there is a tab called overall score. If you go on there, you can filter by party type. You can view your score against peers. All peers, just to clarify, all your peers will be anonymized, so you'll only be able to determine who you are in that graphic. But if you have any specific issues there or are still unclear, just please get in touch with the inquiries mailbox and we can help you specifically.
Thank you very much. And not the last question. The second to last question, where any status is incorrect and once corrected, will that impact a change to the annual rating if applicable?
Yes. So if there is a factual inaccuracy, we'll use and I think this kind of deals with the one below as well. We'll update it, and it will be updated live in your dashboard. Now that might take a day or two with processing time, but we would do that. That is important. And as I said, we've used our records of when qualification and maintenance was submitted. If you have different information, I think please provide that to us on the inquiries.
Can I just quickly jump in? Just one reminder that the annual rating is covering the period from 1st April 2022 until 31st of March 2023. So that is important. The MOQ question, for example, you might be talking about this year's MOQ, which will be counted next year whilst we're looking at last year's. Just to clarify that.
Thank you very much, Bea. And I'll hand over to Nirav now.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to be talking through the theft, the change options for the theft target methodology for the scheme year for 24-25. Just to give it a quick background. So the energy theft reduction scheme, as specified in Schedule 7 of the Retail Energy Code, is there to combat energy theft in the retail energy market, and is there to help support suppliers in terms of their obligations as part of the supply license, section 12A. Following the REC change R0091, the responsibility of the theft target methodology, which determines the level, the distribution, and the value of targets, moved from the record board to the code manager. So the code manager administers the theft detection incentive scheme, or the TDIS, where we would assign suppliers in the market a theft target Currently, that's split between fuel types of gas and electricity, and then it's further split by domestic and non-domestic customer segments of 4 distinct target totals or incentive pots. What the TTM options paper lays out is a number of options for potential changes to the TTM, and also contains the supporting information as well as a number of questions which we're seeking input on. And so effectively, the purpose of this paper is to gather feedback on the proposed options, and be a call for evidence to determine the specific aspects of the change options themselves. So just looking at the slide, just talking to the slide a little bit. So the change option covers 3 areas. So it's incentive pots, the theft detection values, and the theft target. Our change options that I'm presenting, are predicated on the outcomes of the recent TDIS survey that was carried out in October 22, as well as the theft estimation methodology of the TEM analysis that was produced for RECO. To talk a little bit about the incentive pots themselves, so I think it might be best to explain this on the next slide, and I could talk through some of these points on the next slide. You can just move to the next one. So the creation of a more discrete set of incentive pots enables the incentives and costs to be more focused on suppliers whose portfolios contain the specific populations of customer and meter types, where greater level of theft is estimated to occur. At the same time, it enables the differential costs of theft investigations for different customer and meter types to be accommodated, so effectively setting different levels of TDV for the specific pots. And also it enables the setting of theft targets by pot that can be that reflects the estimated incidence of theft, and can be adjusted to incentivize focus on specific areas that are aligned to RECO's wider theft strategy. What I'll talk about in terms of the incentive pot and the diagram on the right-hand side of the slide, each option for the incentive pots can be considered individually. So what I'm going to be talking through is, say, for instance, on the left-hand side of the diagram, where you've got the domestic customer segment, which is split into traditional prepayment, traditional credit, and smart and AMR, that can be considered individually against, say, for instance, the non-domestic side of the diagram, which can be split into SME, INC, and domestic type customers. So one can be considered and not the other. If I just start on the left-hand side, the domestic customer segment is going to be split, like I mentioned, between traditional prepayment meters, traditional credit meters, and smart and AMR in terms of meter types. And this is predicated on the TDIS survey that identified approximately 57% of respondents thought there should be a further split in meter types, so to differentiate between smart and traditional meters. And also the TEM analysis assessed and confirmed the hypothesis that there is a bias towards investigations of prepayment customers, hence the split in meter type. On the non-domestic side of the diagram, we want to introduce a disaggregation of the non-domestic customer segment into SME, INC, and what we call a domestic type customers. And then the SME customer type will then be further split by meter types of smart AMR and traditional. To explain the domestic customer type, so this split is proposed as meters of this type would be expected to exhibit levels of theft and investigation costs that align more closely with the wider domestic sector. So hence, suppliers who have these kind of customer types would have a significant number of these meters in their population, would have a significant advantage in identifying and confirming the thefts compared to, say, the wider non-domestic pot. Also, the split between SME and INC from the at a customer type level reflects the feedback that there's a limited theft in the INC sector. And then finally, the split in the SME customer type segment is proposed to include, is proposed to reflect the TDIS survey feedback, saying that there's an expectation of a lower level of theft for smart and AMR meters compared to traditional meters. hence why there's a split there. So while we're suggesting the split of SME and INC, there's no immediate equivalent data available to help support this split. So there is a potential to use the existing meter point classification data for basically things like meter class, measurement class, profile class to support this. Although this isn't included in the current data input as used for applying the existing TTM. And also there's a wider consideration that the use of these meter point classification data will be made superseded by other changes to the code and to the industry that are coming. So they may not be used going forward. We just wanted to bear that in mind. And so if the option to take forward the SME and the INC split, we would propose defining an inclusive data set to help provide the indication of what are SME, INC and domestic type customers to help with that split. So we'd request participants to provide as much information as possible in response to defining the INC and SME data set. Moving on to TDV, so just go back one slide. So I'm just going to talk about the second part of the slide. So moving on to theft detection value, or the TDV. This hasn't significantly changed from scheme years 22-23 to 23-24, with the only change being an adjustment to inflation using CPI, the Consumer Price Index. So given in light of the change options I've just mentioned for the incentive pots and the limited update to TDV of the past scheme years, we believe that it's important to refresh the evidence base for presenting or for setting the TDV. What I'd note is, for the avoidance of doubt, we're not proposing changes to the underlying definition of TDV. So things like basing it on the value of theft avoided or setting it in a way designed to incentivize specific behaviors. I just wanted to call out in the TDIS survey itself, the majority of the respondents did agree that weighting should be applied in order to incentivize theft detection activity. Though we understand that the motivation for this, behind providing these responses, was to increase the potential value of the detective theft in areas where there's a view that theft historically was under investigated. But we believe that rather than, so given the definition of the TDV, rather than changing the definition of the TDV, this could be more correctly delivered through changing or modifying the theft detection, so the theft target value. So I'll talk about in the next slide in a second. Also, as part of the TDV, the survey identified that a vast majority of respondents also stated that the TDV should also incorporate costs for analytics, desktop reviews, as well as the costs of unsuccessful investigations. So what we do request is participants to provide as much information as possible in response to the TDV consultation questions. Moving to the theft detection slides themselves, we're proposing to retain the overall target of 41,000 confirmed thefts. Using the outcomes of the previous TDIS scheme years, as well as the modelling that was conducted as part of the TEM analysis, we think that there should be there's a need to readjust these values. Basically, what we found is in the domestic customer segments for electricity and gas fuel types, that theft detection was slightly higher, and for the non-domestic side of electricity and gas, in terms of customer segments, theft was slightly lower. So what we're looking to do is redistribute the total confirmed number of thefts of 41,000. So dialing up domestic for electricity and gas, and dialing down the theft targets for non-domestic for electricity and gas. So that's effectively the table that I've just described on the top right hand side of the diagram. I just wanted to then talk through a few other points. So as a point of clarification, so performance against these targets does not directly impact the calculation of the credits and debit positions of parties. So it's rather This is based on the performance of suppliers that are relative to other suppliers in the same segment. So it's effectively where you would sit in terms of a peer comparison league table versus how much you've actually achieved in terms of your theft targets. What the theft targets do impact are the scale of the debits and credits themselves. So in light of the incentive pot change options that we're presenting, we'd also have to then consider the new pots that we're proposing to introduce. So again, what we're looking to do in terms of our approach is would use the existing market share of suppliers and provide a weighting to apply to the different segments. So therefore, where there could be a disproportionate focus applied. So this is effectively based again on the TD survey and the TEM analysis. So basically, what it's trying to say is, say for instance, the TEM analysis showed us that there is a bias in investigation for theft in prepayment meters, and there's a higher conversion rate for investigations of confirmed theft in that meter type. So what we're looking to do is provide a weighting of 0.8, so effectively reducing that a little bit for traditional prepayment meters, while say keeping the weighting for traditional credit meters the same. So that will remain at 1. And again, for say smart AMR meters, we're expecting to exhibit lower levels of theft versus a traditional metering. So the weighting for smart meters will be reduced, or could be reduced to 0.6. And then finally, there was feedback that there's limited theft in the INC market. So hence there's a further reduced weighting that would be applied for INC. So if I just look at the top part of the, so if I look at the domestic side of the table on the bottom right, I'll just talk through. So the traditional prepayment meters will be reduced to 0.8, traditional credit meters will remain at 1, and smart meters would be reduced to 0.6. And then looking at the non-domestic side, so just going back to the diagram, so SME customer type is its own pot. So that's considered separately here. So that would remain with a weighting of 1. But if we were splitting SME down to smart and AMR and traditional, we would then also apply a 0.6 weighting, similar to what I've just described for domestic for smart and AMR, because we're expecting, or there is expected lower levels of theft compared to traditional meters. So traditional meters will stay at 1. And again, what I just mentioned for the final point around the INC market. There's the TEM analysis and the survey are telling us that the INC market, there will be limited theft in the INC market, so that weighting is reduced to 0.5, while the domestic type customer type will remain at 1. Just move on to the final slide. I just wanted to just highlight that this consultation, the purpose of this is both to gather feedback on the proposed options, as well as be a call for evidence to determine, to support the determination of specific aspects of the potential changes that I'm talking about. Both the theft target methodology for 24-25 options paper has been published in the REC portal alongside a response template. So both links are available in these slides. And ultimately, the information that will be gathered as part of this process will be used to help to deter or develop the updated TTM for 24-25. This is a Category 3 document, so it'll go through a formal change process and an industry consultation. This will be late 23, early 24. And the final point I just wanted to highlight was all feedback should be provided by the return of the questions templates to inquiries@recmanager.co.uk with an email title called TTM Options Paper 24-25, and the deadline for this will be the 27th of October this year.
Thank you very much. And just because I'm conscious of time, I will skip on to these section and leave the questions for the end. There will still be a Q&A portion.
Thank you. So today I'll talk us through 3 sections. The first one's a quarterly update on performance assurance, how performance across the market's looking and what we've done about it. So on this slide, we can see the switching trends across the domestic sector. In the last quarter, we've seen before July, we saw a very slight increase in switching, and most of the volumes were dominated by internal migration activity that was being done by a handful of suppliers. But with the price cap increase or the changes in the price cap effective from 1st July, we have noted an actual doubling of switching volumes as compared to June. Actual switching volumes in July stand at about 600,000, the number which is on the slide there. What we've also seen is that whilst switching volumes are changing, switching related events such as erroneous switches, objections, annulments, and withdrawals, they've remained pretty much constant across the quarter. So yeah, that's a good news story, I guess. The next slide, please. This is the snapshot of the non-domestic market, where we've seen peaks in switching around the contract renewal windows, which happen in April and October. More or less, otherwise, switching has been pretty much consistent. We did see some increase in annulments and withdrawals during the previous quarter, so we had intervened. So those numbers have again come down. The CSS P1 issue is possibly responsible for the withdrawal increase that we've seen in the month of July. Just to make a note here, the objection data is not available, so the July graph doesn't include that information. So just a point on that. If we move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we had a look at how switching across the market has been. This gives us more of a view on what the code manager priorities has been in the last quarter. So at the last webinar, we had told you that we were issuing the MEM RFI to improve the coverage of our metering specific topic monitoring, which previously relied solely on DTN and RGMA data, whilst those methods were not mandated. So it didn't allow us to cover supplier MEM interactions where they were using other means. Our MEM RFI, we had about 50% of MEMs across both electricity and gas responded to all questions that were asked. For electricity, we did make some questions optional, where people were using DTN for more than 95% of their processes. Where people have not responded, we are enforcing submissions. So parties who've not submitted will be receiving management assertions where they'll need to explain why they've not submitted, and also they'll have to confirm that they'll make the submission within 6 weeks. We'll also be applying PATs on areas where we've seen some poor performance, just to help improve that performance. This is specifically relating to faults and meter exchange processes that the RFI touched upon. Another area of focus for us has been the data cleanse sprints. So we at the last webinar as well, we had told you that we will be prioritizing the first sprint on 3 reports, which are listed on the screen. We're halfway through these sprints, and we have given PAB a view on progress so far. Parties who have not demonstrated significant progress and we think would be potentially at risk of missing the targets for December, we'll be issuing PATs to those parties. Parties that fail to meet the targets by the end of the sprint will be escalated to PAB, and there'll be PATs applied on those. And finally, we have looked into objections and annulments. So we did understand that there was lack of clarity on some of the requirements within the code. We have taken guidance to RIG, and that's now published on the REC portal for parties to refer to. We're also working with the wider code manager team to introduce more clarity within the code documentation as well. We did, in certain cases where we had identified misuse of objections and annulments, we have, with PAB's approval, made referrals to Ofgem as well. Next slide, please. So having spoken about the priorities for the last quarter, we can look at a snapshot of how PATs have been applied in the last quarter. So we have monitored 20 risk drivers on a monthly basis. From March to July, we've seen a reduction in the normalized risk driver score across the market, which demonstrates performance is improving. We have made higher use of notifications, which gives parties an opportunity to intervene and proactively improve performance before we apply more PATs. What we've also done is we've reduced the number of RFIs we issued with the softer touch RFCs that Anton previously spoke about. As you can see, compared to previous months, we have tried to reduce the need for RFIs by using the other methods available to us. If we go to the next slide, please. So what are our priorities for the next few months? So we are looking at the performance assurance framework refresh. So as we mentioned, we have already started using softer touch RFCs in the first instance. We'll continue to do so, but we're also making use of forums such as RIG and other groups, metering experts panel, for example, to build on understanding of emerging issues. Before we apply any mass scale RFIs, RFCs, we will be using these routes, and we'll also be consulting with our members and using their expert knowledge to obtain more information before we apply PATs. One other thing that you will see would be in the coming months, we'll be reviewing some of our performance assurance methodology and techniques documents. We will be proposing a shift to a two-tier data review process, wherein on a monthly basis, we act on things that are urgent, but we stack up less urgent things for quarterly action, and also first use industry consultation rather than individual RFCs, RFIs. That's one of the things. Then also, as Anton had previously touched upon as well, we will be focusing more on performance of rec services and the impacts it may have on the performance across the retail market. So in recent months, we've seen some major incidents with the centralized registration service impacting switching performance. As a first step, what we've done is we've reviewed the retail risk register, and we've increased the priority score assigned to the retail risk, which looks at impacts of rec service performance to recognize the impact it has. We have also applied focus PATs on various rec service providers to cover performance areas like where dips in performance we've seen. And we also continue to do direct assurance on rec services. Finally, we expect switching volumes to increase. So our objective is going to be, as the switching volumes increase, we want to ensure the market maintains the related events such as erroneous switches, switch meter read disputes, which might lead to a negative consumer outcome, that those don't increase exponentially, but those remain within permissible levels. So our focus will be on that. That is, if we move to the next slide, please. So that was our view on party assurance. Just very quickly on service provider side as well. We were generally seeing an improvement in service provider performance up till June. July, with the major switching incident occurring, we did see switching performance across rec services dip, and August continues to be impacted slightly by that. But as you can see on the screen, the average performance across the market, across service providers, is slightly on an upwards trend, so which is positive, but we will continue to apply focus PATs to drive further improvement. Also in April, the incentive regime for the centralized registration service provider was introduced, which should also we should see positive outcomes of that performance charge in the coming quarter. I think that covers our party assurance section. And that's about party and service provider update. The next one's MHHS. If we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I'll quickly touch upon a few things here. So yes, we continue to work with the SECO to develop the MHHS qualification process that suppliers, DNOs, and MEMS will need to complete. Other roles governed under the BSc will also complete that, but these are the 3 roles under our governance that will need to complete qualification to demonstrate they can operate under the new arrangements. This process is being developed through a working group hosted by the MHHS program called the Qualification Working Group. I would encourage all organizations who aren't already present on this working group to please sign up to that working group. There are some contact details on the slide you can use. Important dates to keep in mind. As of now, the plan is that migration into the new arrangements will begin in April 2025, which is referred to as M11, which is one of the program milestones. So in order to facilitate this, all DNOs would need to be qualified before this date to be able to start taking registrations into the new arrangement. For migrated MPANs, there is a deadline in March 2026 where reverse migration will no longer be allowed. And that's called M14. So after this point, any supplier that's not completed their qualification for MHHS, they will not be able to operate until they qualify for the new arrangements and will therefore not be able to accept new customers. Ofgem is also considering sanctions to apply on suppliers who've not qualified by this date. The full migration is planned to be completed by October 2026, referred to as M15. Agents who have not completed their qualification by this time will no longer be able to be appointed to the migrated MPANs and therefore would need to undergo any enduring qualification to then start being appointed as metering services for these MPANs. So these are just dates to bear in mind. And what have we been doing? So we have, with approval from PAB, published the REC assessment criteria for MHHS qualification. This is published on the REC portal. You can find it by going into party operations and under useful documents. The link's there on the slides as well, which I think will be circulated later. So, yep, I think if we move to the next bit, please. Thank you. Risk register consultation. So we have reviewed the risk register as in line with the annual pay-up activity. Some of the key changes we've made this time is we've reviewed the MHHS design artifacts that are available, and we've added consideration for MHHS and with the view that this will now allow us to facilitate conversations with the DIP manager, ElectraRink, and the registration services to agree appropriate reporting in place to monitor retail risks that will be introduced once migration starts. As previously mentioned as well, we've increased the priority score for the retail risk which relates to a performance of REC services impacting switching. This has been increased in line with recent events. And then we've also looked at various retail risks and risk drivers, and we have, in order to focus on areas where more focus is needed, we have removed certain risks, we've added and risk drivers, and we've added certain risk drivers to add more flexibility. I think Anton touched on one example wherein we're splitting the objection risk driver to be able to set separate thresholds for domestic and non-domestic market. This risk register has gone out for consultation. You should have received an email yesterday informing you of it. The consultation will run for 10 working days total. So please respond to this consultation. I think the reference is C350 off the top of my head, but the comms came out last evening. So please have a look at that and please respond. Brilliant. I think that covers the updates I wanted to give. And I think I'm passing back to Anton for the next section.
So I just wanted to look ahead and wrap up this before we do take any questions. A forward look fundamentally thinks about our operating plan. We did consult and engage with organisations on this and took lots of valuable feedback, but I just want to explain where it is at the moment. So if we move to the next slide. So our principal areas of focus at the moment are about driving accountability for performance, both of parties and service providers, the annual rating being a clear example of that kind of thing. But this also relates to service providers as well. We naturally monitor switching. Switching is an essential part of the REC, and being prepared for potential mass market switching again is essential, and clearly being ready for MHHS is important. If we move on to the next slide, in terms of thinking about how we allocate our resources, we've consistently shared how we spend our time, and I thought it was important to reflect how we intend on spending our time in the coming year. So market entry is essential, although the demand for that activity is not something we can entirely predict. It's based on the number of applications, but we've allocated about 1/5 of our time for those kinds of activities, about 1/10 for maintenance of qualification, which includes all of the, I think there's about 1,400 organisations under the REC now, including certain new roles like the CSS interface providers. Approximately 1/3 of our time is on party monitoring and techniques in response to the overall performance seen in the market, as we've talked about. We previously did specific interventions in relation to DNOs, directly assessing them in a pre-planned way. That isn't our intention this year, and we've increased our allocation of time that we spent focused on service provider performance and the accuracy of their reporting. I guess that drives the kind of outcome of the activities that we intend to perform. And I wanted to talk you through some of the key activities that are in the operating plan that's previously been shared. So I think that's on the next slide. Oh, there we go. So just thinking about this, I thought it was important. We do a lot of things kind of every month. For example, the entry process is there every month. TDIS reporting is there every month, but I thought calling out the most important things was the key to do in this session. The first one was that annual rating of party performance, which is annual, so we would expect to occur once a year, and that we've been sharing now, and you can see your own information. Another important activity that we've been doing on an annual basis is mem data reconciliation via the CDSP. So this is an important and recurring activity where we understand the data issues that could impact each other and settlement codes, and use this as a basis for driving performance improvement and helping with better, cleaner data. If we move on to the next slide, I wanted to call out several activities, although one of them is kind of more of a tranche. So the two activities are deep dive PAB topics, where we're going to look at, just before Christmas. The first one relates to switching. So we have anticipated and observed changes in the market following changes to the price cap. That probably will continue, and actually it's really important that we share our insight and analysis of how effective that is, whether it's a market that looks like it's going well and doesn't need any PATs, whether there are specific issues or anything like that. So a deep dive on that topic in December using real live data provided from CSS. Clearly, the CSSP one will affect that and will need to be taken into account. There needs to be some common sense that, but I don't think it is so dramatic that it would obfuscate the entire picture. Each year, we do an annual review of CME and dormant parties. I talked before about gatekeeping to protect market participants. This is a really clear example. So this is looking at why small organisations, if they continue to be appropriate to operate in the market, if their CME caps are appropriate, if there are any particular dormant organisations, for which there might need to be some controls to protect other organisations, or if there are any organisations that have massive exponential growth for which we just need comfort that their performance is that growth isn't creating any performance issues or creating issues for others in the market interacting with them. That is something we've been doing for the past 2 years. This will be the second time that we do it. The next one is on MHHS. You can see there's quite a lot of dots or coloured in bars. I think the key thing to say is that we're actively engaging with that programme, making sure that the rec element is as efficient as can be, is coordinated as can be with the BSE, and is doesn't involve unnecessary activities that couldn't otherwise be streamlined. This includes things like a clearly baselined approach and plan, clear documented criteria, but I just wanted to say that's a really important focus area for us. And we talked about that focus on making sure service provision is of a high quality, and I guess this is part of us providing information to the Performance Assurance Board, part of the RECO board, and that involves operational updates from many of the service providers. Many of the non-executives have been particularly interested in understanding directly from these service providers their performance, their plans to improve, and things like that. So you'll notice that some of these relate to the code manager, because the code manager is a critical service and its performance and value for money is essential for those that essentially fund it, and that spans all of the operations of the code manager, with a bit more focus on changing the code's roadmap, I guess because of their centrality to our operation. Similarly, there are deep dives into the technology service providers, including CSS and the suite of services provided by DCC, the inquiry services and some of the RECO services. You'll notice a greater emphasis on the CSS and services provided by DCC as we kind of monitor that a bit more closely and we understand and seek improvements in service provision. I did try and snip the most important pieces. There is kind of some more activities, as we previously discussed, about annual updates to the specific documents, improvements of that. I just wanted to call out two things there. One is that we're providing a full review of the park, and actually one of the key focuses is making sure that that it is the right request list, that it is the most efficient way, well, each item in there is the most efficient way of heading towards that assurance. And if there are opportunities for us to be removing things from that, and that is appropriate, that is definitely something we're actively looking to do. I think we're more focused on that where the party provides the data for obvious reasons, because it's often going to be a greater burden than centrally, but we'll assume it in both cases. The other thing to know is that shortly we will be communicating 2024 maintenance qualification deadlines. So this is the calendar year of 2024. So you'll have plenty of time to identify, even if you refer in the first month, what you need to do, when, and plan it in. So I think that's a really important communication just to look out for, to help you plan your workload and make things easier for yourself. So that was my overview of the operating plan. I know there are some questions. Maybe it's time to go to that.
Yes, there are quite a few questions, so we'll go through them really quickly. The first question is, can you confirm how many times you have issued PATs out and they've been incorrect?
I don't know if that's a question that I would understand. So we issue things like requests for clarification. I don't think that can be incorrect. What I would say is all of the more serious PATs are determined by the Performance Assurance Board, subject to full cleared governance. I don't know if the concept of those being incorrect makes sense. I guess that's a decision of a governance board that can be appealed.
Second question is, will you be focusing on improving your data quality? It has been mentioned quite a few times that you send out RFCs or RFIs based on erroneous data. I
don't think that's always the case, actually. Sometimes we send out RFCs and RFIs because there's and that is due either, well, there's two things that it can be due. Sometimes it's because a party hasn't provided us all the information we need, and that often makes their picture look worse. So some of the information that we've requested in the park helps us add context about, you know, what segment of the market people are in, those kind of things. So I think that is part of it. In terms of data quality issues, sometimes that's because people are doing things like internal migrations that they haven't notified us of. So I don't know if that makes our data incorrect per se, but I do think that it's important that you engage with us on the data that you're provided, and that's one of the reasons you're provided it. Yeah, where we do have, if we've been provided data that's only partially provided by, for example, one of the service providers, we don't issue that on the dashboard until we're confident that it's accurate. So I don't think that is the right way to frame that question. But we do offer you opportunities to engage with us on the park, the measurement criteria, on the risk register, and we'd welcome that. Definitely welcome that.
The next question is, can you confirm how you notify a supplier a PAT has been issued against them?
On the rec portal.
Next question. For the proposed weighting 0.8 for TRAD ppm, are you suggesting that there is lower theft for TRAD ppm versus credit, or that is easier to identify than traditional ppm?
So, so the TEM analysis, they tested a hypothesis and confirmed that there's a bias towards traditional prepayment meters, and that there's a bias in terms of investigation, and then the confirmed thefts associated with those investigations. So what we're proposing is, if there is already a bias towards that, to reduce that weighting to 0.8, to sort of redistribute it and balance out the focus again. So we're not saying there's less theft in that area. It's just there was a bias towards it.
Thank you, Nirav. The next, I guess, statement is the annual ranking wiki page does not give the detail on the specific condition PAT issued or CME breach. What are, can we have a list, please?
So a specific condition is listed in the performance assurance techniques document. This is one of the most significant actions that would that the PAB can take. It's always subject to PAB decision. There haven't been a great deal of these. It's very serious. If you were involved in such a thing, we would be directly communicating with you on that, and I think you'd know. In terms of CME, that really reasonably recent market entrants are given particular limits, and assumed to stay within those. That information is monitored. When we find organisations stray outside those limits, that is what a CME breach would be. Or similarly, if the PAB imposed a specific condition on you that was then breached, that's what those things mean.
Thank you. The next question is, on a party's annual ranking page, can you show what the current outstanding PATs are and for a list of what total PATs issued are?
So we don't actually take the total PATs into account when we're calculating the annual ranking. Therefore, I mean, we can take the suggestion on board, but I don't think it'll add any value to that.
Yes, yeah, as just to build on what V said there, it's basically a yes or no. Have you had an action plan PAT? Yes or no. Have you had a specific condition PAT? It's not have you had 6 action plan PATs versus 1. That doesn't make any difference.
Thank you. The next question is it reasonable to issue PATs which will affect annual rating for a year on the data cleanse at the midpoint rather than at the end of the cleanse?
I think we have to be quite careful. PATs is a massive term. So guidance, yeah, I think it's totally okay to issue guidance. Notification, that's totally okay. So actually, you know, there are some kind of very serious things and very soft things. V, you had a...
No, I was just going to say we're only issuing notifications for those just to help people, you know, nudge people along. And notifications don't count towards the annual rating. Just to clarify that point.
Thank you. The next question is, are suppliers always made aware of when a PAT is escalated to Ofgem?
So we only have one PAT that is escalated to Ofgem, which is called escalation to Ofgem, I think, or Ofgem escalation or referral. There we go.
Yeah.
In that case, that is true. Yes, this is a very extreme. This does happen, but this is for only the most significant activities. This isn't a routine thing. We should know that the Ofgem are invited to the Performance Assurance Board.
Thank you. This next question, I think, was asked during the theft target slides. And the question is, will the suppliers share based on volume or customer numbers?
It'll be customer numbers.
Thank you. The next question is 75% of the RFIs, RFCs issued to us were based on incorrect backing data. Please clarify the process for how ranking can be appealed, amended accordingly.
So again, to clarify, the RFIs and RFCs do not count towards the annual rating. Yeah, I think that should address your question.
And the next question is, can you confirm how many of you work in your wider team?
I think that's quite a confusing question because we have an integrated code manager integrating services with Reco. I actually don't know how to answer that question, but I think we have people dedicated specifically to performance assurance help desk, to performance assurance data, to the qualification and entry, and to performance assurance activities themselves. But actually, many of the other services in the kind of Reco code manager landscape also contribute. Some of our communications dealt via the OEMs. Some of our change activities via. So it's actually an integrated service as part of a larger team. So I find it quite hard to answer that one.
Yeah. And the last question is, how do we find the definition of the criteria, i.e. management assertion, Pat? What does that mean?
So in our techniques document, each of the types of PAT are set out, and we will be clearing this up and making it easier to access and understand shortly. But it's on the REC portal. However, management assertion is a PAT that is on the more serious end. Each of them say how they will be applied, and that's an example where that's applied basically on the decision of the PAB and then communicated directly to the affected organisation. I think a record of all the PATs is included in your REC portal account.
I think that's all of the questions for today, if I'm not mistaken. I think so. So thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. We just have a few questions to ask, some feedback that we would really appreciate if you completed. Other than that, thank you very much, and yeah, we'll see you soon.